Welcome to the show where we explore the who, what, where, how, and why of the extraordinary people who define our north of normal metro. I'm Conrad Fargo, and this is the Fargo Five. Today we have Dr. Thomas Ambrosio, who is a professor of political science and international politics at international politics at NDSU. Hello, Dr. Thomas. Yeah, sure.
It's Tom is fine.
Tom is fine.
So I got my PhD at the University of Virginia, where no one called anyone doctor.
Okay.
Because Thomas Jefferson, who founded the university, didn't have a PhD.
Okay.
So it was kind of this thing that no one called anyone doctor.
So the founder was Tom. You're Tom.
I'm Tom.
Neither of you want to be called doctor.
That's fine. Well, he didn't have he was just a lawyer. Kind of America's original sin, a country founded by lawyers. So.
Yeah. Well, and so you are a professor. You don't want to be called doctor. It almost feels like, Mr. Johnson was my dad's name. Call me Tom.
Oh, no,
it's not that kind of a thing at all.
It's just kind of a tradition from University of Virginia. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what I like to open up with is first how I know you, which is Wayne and Cheryl, pillars of the community. I mean, they really talk about cool people who know cool people.
I know.
You are constantly at their parties. I am constantly at their parties.
That's right. And I play role-playing games with Wayne.
Okay.
And then
D&D.
Yeah. A little bit of D&D. Shadow Dark, he moved away from D&D. But that's another whole story.
Yeah. Well, Wayne's a great guy. I delivered pizza with Wayne for like 12 years.
Oh.
That's how he and we would actually always talk politics. Because that was my conversation du jour as a young man in his 20s with nothing to lose.
Right.
These days, I keep my mouth shut, but I still remember the stuff kicking around my head. Now, you went the other direction. You talk politics all day, every day?
Pretty much all day, every day. Yeah. So, kind of the origins of it all. A wee lad in New Jersey, in the Great Garden State. My family was always politically aware. Now, we're not politically active because we're from New Jersey and far too cynical to be politically active and believe we'd actually change anything.
Okay.
So we're interested and very aware, but talked about it all the time, but never really.
You're talking my language here.
Yeah. Way too cynical for that.
Okay.
So I grew up during the Cold War. Wow. So that was...
How old are you?
Exactly, right? I graduated high school in 1989.
Okay.
So, of course, this momentous year where the thing that we had believed about Eastern Europe, that the Soviet bloc was unchangeable, that it was going to last forever, that disappears.
Yeah.
First semester of college, the Berlin Wall falls.
Yeah.
Again, this thing that felt permanent.
Can we center on that for just a little bit?
Sure.
My understanding, it wasn't the Central Intelligence Agency, weren't they formed just to watch the Soviet Union? Wasn't that? Is that not their region?
The CIA kind of gets a start during World War II in terms of kind of secret intelligence.
And watching Russia, basically.
Well, for the most part, watching this. Yeah, exactly. Watching the Soviet Union, because that was our. So if we think about, I graduated in 1989. My mother, not to out her in terms of her age, was born in 1947 when the Cold War kind of officially begins with this very famous speech by President Truman. So, her generation, full generation, she has me, and then I graduate high school. So 2 generations of this global conflict where it kind of sucks the oxygen out of the entire geopolitical realm.
And my understanding was when Eastern Europe fell like that, when the Berlin Wall came, it was all kind of a surprise.
It was a surprise to everyone. There was a couple of people, and then even the Soviet Union. And then it's 2 years later, the Soviet Union collapses. And it was just this wild time to be alive and to be interested in international politics and to study that area. We're seeing some similar changes now in terms of kind of a change in nature of the international system, but it's a much slower and longer process. But that rapid change, I try to tell my students, of course, for them, the 1989 is as close to them now that, and my math is bad than World War II was to me, So it's completely different world. So they can't even comprehend kind of the nature of the change in such a rapid, 2.5 years, the entire global system changes.
And that's the reason I was when did the CIA form? Because I just want to kind of punctuate how sudden and surprise, like nobody, not even the CIA, whose whole existence like is predicated on we're going to know what's happening,
right?
Well, like, and they didn't see those moving parts. Like, what's as a professor of that topic? Like, does that not surprise you? Does that not blow your mind?
No,
that it was a surprise.
Politics is so not. I wouldn't say random. There's a lot of things that we know, or that we think we know. There are certain patterns that we see over and over again, domestically, internationally.
Yeah.
But ultimately, politics is about humans, and humans can do strange things.
Yeah.
And there are some people who did get it right. There are some people who had kind of the crystal ball
and saw that coming,
and kind of saw things coming because they were looking at it at a certain angle. Though there's a very famous article that came out after the Soviet Union collapse, which was why the Soviet Union will not collapse. It was sent in and agreed to be published before during 1991, and then of course it was published in 1992. So it was gone. So all the predictions we make, it's hard to make predictions. Again, we know certain things. We have certain patterns that we see. International politics, domestic politics, they rhyme, and that's the study of political science. Ultimately, that's what we do. We try to look for these patterns. So what some people don't understand about political science and where it kind of fits into the social sciences. If we think about political science is very much like history, but history is trying to explain, like, why did this particular case happen? Mm-hmm. So why did the French Revolution happen? They go kind of deep into it.
Yeah.
Political science says, why do revolutions happen? Why did World War II happen? Whereas international politics says, why do wars happen? And what can we learn from the past in order to understand patterns in the past, to understand what we're going through now, and then hopefully, maybe, most likely poorly, predict the future.
Okay. Well, and I was actually going to comment, it almost feels like, and I've never thought about it in this way, but it is almost the flip side of economics, where economics would be prediction of the future, or no? Do you not think that?
No, economics is trying to predict the future. Absolutely,
they're both focused a lot on humans, and they are. I think the term is complex dynamic systems. Is that that's the buzz?
We are.
There's
so many moving parts. So think about especially international relations, and a lot of people tend to shut it off.
Yeah,
and I always tell my students, or the kind of first day of class, one of my favorite lines from the book Dune: the most important thing that Paul learned was that he could learn. So the most important thing about international politics is that people can understand international politics. It's just very complex.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an onion. You have the core of the onion, but as you add more layers to it, kind of going out from the core of that onion, you start to see these layers, and you start to see how complex it is. That everything kind of connects to each other. So it's easy for people to say, well, these people have been fighting forever, or, well, just resolve the Ukraine conflict, for example. Of course, that's in the news this week and last week. It's not that easy.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot going on. And I kind of say that, I don't mean to say that just flippantly, but it's just, there is very, very complex. And part of my job, at least for my students, vis-a-vis my students, is that I try to take this complex situation and make it understandable.
Yeah.
And that's, I hope that's what my students get away or take from the class, is that even if they don't remember what I said, that they actually have the capacity to understand it themselves and to research it themselves.
Yeah. And so what I would like to try to understand, most people, I think these days, go to university, they see their professor, you're teaching, how many hours a week, but what is it like being a professor, especially in, like the day to day? Like, is no day ever the same? Is there some patterns? Like, what is it like being, if I said to myself, you know what I want, I love this political science stuff, I'm going to go get a doctorate, become a professor myself.
Right.
Like, what would I have in store for my day to day?
Well, so regular professor, not someone who's in administration, they basically have three legs to their job.
Okay.
They have, depending on the university or your higher education institution. So NDSU is a research one, so we're expected to do research.
Okay.
So we have our research projects we're working on. Now, those are whatever kind of we want to do, as long as it gets published and we're working on stuff. And then we have our teaching, then we have our service. Service is the grunt work. Service is the meetings. I joke that I teach and I research for free, and they pay me to go to meetings.
Okay.
That's what I'm being paid to do. The rest of the stuff I just love doing. Meetings are just a grind.
And what is what does a professor have to meet about?
Oh,
like what?
We're setting policy, or we're going to change curriculum.
That's not the job of the admins? Like, that sounds like an admin job.
No,
what are the admins? And I've been told, so, universities are under a lot of scrutiny or a lot of bad publicity, shall we say, because of the growing administration class over the years, right?
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely true.
And so what are the administrators doing? Like, if they're not setting the policies.
Oh dear, I don't know what they do many times.
I see. Oh, am I putting you in hot water? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. That's why God made tenure. Anyway, but sometimes I really don't know. So faculty have what we call, they call it shared governance, but really we're allowed some autonomy in some areas sometimes.
Yeah.
But there tends to be a lot of bureaucratic hoops that you have to kind of jump through. And it really depends on the issue area. Like, we have no control over budget. We have no control over hiring, ultimately. We have no control over organization. We have some control over curriculum, some very limited control over how we evaluate us. And then what I mean by evaluation is essentially the process of tenure and keeping tenure.
Yeah.
So we have some autonomy, but ultimately even that's dictated from above. And we don't have the final say as faculty. So there seems to be a lot of meetings. I mean, I have actually a meeting tomorrow. I'm a chair of a committee. And I run my meetings like, okay, we're here to meet. We're going to do what we're going to do. We're not here to play around. We're not here to talk about having meetings about meetings, which will eventually will lead to meetings. We have work to do. Let's do it, and let's get out of here, because none of us want to be here. None of us, at least those of us who want to stay faculty, got into this for meetings. Now, there are people who love meetings and think that's productivity, but I've got a book I'm writing, got an encyclopedia I'm an editor of, and this semester I'm not teaching because I'm working on research projects, but yeah, I'd rather be doing that stuff.
You seems like you have a lot of discretion, though, at like the things that you produce. It almost feels entrepreneurial.
It is, yeah.
Like,
absolutely.
my circle is a lot of entrepreneurs, and so I typically have a difficult time gelling with people with jobs because I haven't had one in 15 years, and I don't get it. And when I thought of the university, being a doctor, being a professor, sounds more like it would be like a job, but maybe not as much. The meetings part, like you say, that's what they pay me for.
The meetings are the
that's
job
the
part.
Jobby
And the grading
job.
part is sometimes, that's also the job part. But like, I can research whatever I want. If you're a junior faculty, so someone who doesn't have tenure yet, you're trying to probably publish in certain areas. And it depends, again, every university is going to be different. My department sets our publication requirements, and we're very, very flexible about what you publish in. So I'm a political scientist. I've published a whole bunch in political science, but I've just, over the last 5 years, decided, I'm going to start publishing about board games, historical board games.
Yeah.
And I can do that because I'm a full professor, so I've already gotten tenure. Then I went up for promotion after that. So I can pretty much do whatever I want. And at a certain point, it's still political science. It's still looking at, in my case, looking at how history and geopolitics and politics is represented through board games.
Who's measuring? So, like, I want to say the word KPI. Like, you just need to be researching, right? You need to be publishing and researching. Who's measuring the quality? Is it your other professors?
Kind of peers, but also when you're publishing, so let's say an article in a journal, that's going to be peer reviewed anyway. That's going to be reviewed by people outside, kind of a double blind review. You don't know who they are, you don't know who, or they don't know who you are. So it's kind of reviewed that way. So that becomes your kind of quality check.
And so the actors you are also yourself doing double-blinded reviews.
Oh, I've done a whole bunch of them. Yeah.
How often do you give negative reviews, and how often do you give positive reviews?
I give you. I tend to be. I think as I'm getting older, I tend to be a little bit more generous.
More really?
More
not
generous.
More crotchety,
Yes, actually,
not more crotchety
more
and strict.
generous, actually.
More like
yeah.
Okay.
I'm kind of starting to see. In my philosophy is like, look, does this do something interesting? But I'll give lots. I've done hundreds and hundreds of reviews over my 25 years, and probably 40%, 50% have been negative. 40%, and when negative isn't necessarily like, hey, don't publish this. I've had those like, this is just not going to do it.
Yeah.
Others have been like, hey, you need to work on these things. There are some major changes you need to do. So just recently did one where it's like, okay, these things need to be changed and these need to be added. So, I mean, it's that is kind of grunt work, but it's kind of a karma thing.
Yeah.
Because I've sent off my stuff to be reviewed.
Yeah.
So you're kind of doing yourself. But there's a growing actually opposition to that, to doing these reviews, because a lot of the journals that we publish in have been bought out by hedge funds.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm giving you my labor for effectively free, and you're making profit off of the journal publications.
I see.
So it's like, well, you should give me something a little back.
And which part of those three legs is doing the journal publications? That's
the research part. Well, the
reviews
are kind of service.
Okay.
That'd be service.
Yeah.
That I actually do enjoy doing.
But if you were to stop doing it altogether, would you?
That'd be fine. I mean, I do enough service.
Yeah. I find it interesting. I always try to think about the incentives that are involved with anything and everything in the university system is probably one of the more interesting things that exist out there, because the incentives, at the end of the day, it's like a nonprofit, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, there are for-profit universities or colleges, but for the most part, it's a nonprofit. But our incentive structure, the kind of way it's set up, when you first get hired, you're assistant professor without tenure, and of course, you want tenure.
Yes.
Then you can still be fired. It's not a job for life. It's just you have to be fired with like substantial cause.
Yeah.
In that case, it's all about publish or perish. So it's all about how many articles, how many books can you get out.
Getting famous, getting seen, getting known.
And that's really kind of the key. Is that and teaching kind of goes by the wayside, even though everyone says, everything's important. It's not, right? It's all about research initially.
Yeah.
And then one hopes that you would transition. Now, it kind of differs by the college. So if you're at a place that is not a research one, if you're at a place that is a teaching college, for example, where you're not expected to do research, but you're expected to do very intensive teaching. And very much making those individual connections to the students, then you're going to be evaluated differently.
Okay, this is interesting. And I didn't realize there were different categorizations of universities.
I mean, if I'm teaching at a community college and my tenure is going to be based upon almost entirely teaching, they probably don't care if I publish at all. Whereas a research one, NDSU is kind of in that, it's a research one, but kind of a lower ranked research one. So the standards are not like crazy compared to, say, if you're like a place like Harvard, for example, kind of the opposite end. It's not even just what you publish. It's like how well known you are. Are you being called on the CNN? Things of that nature.
I see.
So it's a very, very kind of different world. This is kind of NDSU is nice in that respect, at least my department in particular. Everyone just lets you do what you want. So I can do my research on my board games, for example, and just be perfectly happy doing that. And I have a book contract, so I'm ready to rock on that. So that's
very cool. So what would is Concordia? And so is it just
Concordia
the two categories?
Concordia would be much more of a teaching college.
Okay,
they do some research, but for the most part, it's going to be kind of quality of teaching, quality of engagement, a lot more service.
Okay, and so. Is there like a hierarchy? Like research is probably considered higher end?
Some people would say that. I would think it's just different.
Okay.
It's just different. It's a different kind of category of what you're providing and what the students want.
Yeah.
So, if you go to, say, especially Concordia is kind of a larger liberal arts school, but if you go to like some of these small liberal arts colleges, like that's what you're going there for.
Yeah.
You're going there for that experience, kind of the very small classes, very hands-on professors. And, if you go to Research One, it's a very different world.
Well, and so teaching has its own rewards, and gosh, I love to teach. The seeing somebody else say back what you said to them, it's like, oh yeah, you got it, great, right? Like watching them catch on and have the right questions, those kinds of things. Research has to be kind of another color. Like, do you always get peer review? Do you always get feedback? Is that what drives?
You're always getting feedback.
Yeah,
you're always getting feedback, and it's
never.
I mean, at least for me, I've kind of jumped from kind of topic to topic to topic. So it's about keeping it fresh for me, and just something I enjoy doing. And then there's, of course, there's some satisfaction to see yourself in print. For example, when I have eventually my board game book, it's going to be like I actually wrote. I challenged myself to basically learn an entirely different field. And here's my end product.
Does the research also carry with it usually grants? Like you're trying to research along with the grant, so that's not necessary.
Not necessary. It depends on what you're doing. If there's a cost to it, you're going to have to get someone to fund it. So if you're doing a large survey, you need someone to fund that. My research tends to be kind of me typing at my computer in my office. So I don't need a whole lot of money.
We talked about this a little bit before the show, that there are, so talking about different categories, I mean, certainly there's the humanities and the so-called softer sciences, and these are going to be different. We had previous guests of the show, Dr. Annie Tangpong. I don't know if I'm remembering her name correctly, but she was a mechanical engineer, if I remember correctly. And I said something like, oh boy, that's got to be tough to get that doctorate, because either the bridge falls or not, whereas in the humanities feels like there's more discretion involved.
It's less serious. I mean, the real world implications. Anyone who takes it that seriously is kind of on. I think is on the wrong track.
Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that.
I mean, if I get something wrong, I get something wrong.
Okay.
So what? That's the way it goes.
And how do you judge? In these softer sciences with complex dynamic systems, it's not like you're creating a hypothesis and then testing. It's impossible to, in a vacuum, create experimentation. Or are you doing experiments? I suppose with your board games.
Not for me, for board games, actually, I did have students play a very complex, very kind of morally gray board game, and kind of get their reactions to it. But some of it would be predictions, and then you're kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, and someone will stand on your shoulders as well. Mm-hmm. That you're kind of trying to shift things one way or another or kind of add a little bit more to the field. Yeah. So I've done a lot of research on authoritarianism, for example, and in particular, I kind of had this one article about authoritarian diffusion, where basically the spread of authoritarianism from place to place.
How did you? I want to hear about that.
Yeah,
how did you? But I'd really like to kind of settle and how did you define authoritarian? What a word!
Right.
How did you?
It's become a lot more gray in recent years, but authoritarian, basically those countries where the elections don't matter, are not going to have much of an impact on the outcome. And there are lots of shades of authoritarianism. There isn't just like authoritarians are democratic, but there's a lot of cases in the middle, kind of the edge cases where it kind of goes one way or another, and a lot of it's perspective. Yeah. So not to go down too far of a rabbit hole, but so last year, Romania, for example, had an election, and then they were going to have a runoff election for the president, and they decided, we don't like the candidate who's going to win, so we're just going to cancel the election.
Yeah.
But the reason they canceled it was because he was a populist, kind of a right-wing populist. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the problems in political science and kind of how do you measure democracy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So they'd be like, well, I'm sure there's a lot of her who'd be like, well, that's really not an undemocratic action to cancel an election if a right-wing populist is going to win. And it's like, oh, all right. So how we measure things, of course, will influence how we see them. We start with our kind of blinder, or not kind of the lens we put on things. Yeah. So the authoritarianism, I was kind of looking at much more kind of broader cases, but my kind of one of the ways I got into it was actually studying Russia.
Okay.
And I called early, and lots of people predicted this. It was not just me, and most of my predictions are wrong anyway. So it's not, you throw, a broken clock is right, twice a day. But I was like, Putin's going down this authoritarian path. And I was like yelled at a conference once in Ljubljana, Slovenia, for saying there's authoritarian tendencies in Russia. And I kind of called that one early. I kind of saw how things were going. But I kind of, maybe I'm just too cynical, and therefore kind of looked at it through that kind of cynical lens. But it happened to be kind of a correct prediction on that part. So I kind of got, in some ways, authoritarianism by studying Russia. Kind of a back way of getting to Russia. I've always kind of studied Russia in my dissertation. In part was on Russia, but in a very, very different context, and just kind of naturally gravitated me towards authoritarianism because, well, Russia was going down that path.
I had said to you before the show, I was like, yeah, politics used to be an obsession of mine. And then, of course, I'm in sales. How I make a living is by knowing people and being their friends. It's very difficult to have political opinions and have people keep liking you. Right. Now, you talk politics all day, every day. You must have a political opinion?
Well, I have lots of political opinions, but I have to kind of go into professor mode.
Okay.
So my wife hears one mode, my family hears one mode, but then my students hear a different mode, kind of professor mode. And so I kind of try to be, you don't want to go down too much of the path of, well, there's, on the one hand, on the other hand, right?
Both sidesism, right?
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to do that.
At least from my perspective, I think the proper role of a professor is to at least try to get a middle ground. Some professors don't believe that. They'll kind of go in there and what people hear about or are concerned about with higher education kind of being a propaganda factory. That is also true.
Yeah.
Now, not all faculty do that. Like my faculty tend to be, at least in my department, tend to be we're much more aware, I think, than other departments about the political implications of what we say, because we're political scientists.
Yeah.
But others are much more, especially in the wider academia or academy, are much more firebrand. They see their teaching as advocacy. They see their research as advocacy.
Sure.
Whereas,
and why wouldn't you? I mean, if you believe so
if you believe
strongly,
something and
if you believe so
you
strongly,
have a PhD and you kind of rely on that, and you kind of have that ego.
Do you think maybe that so I think it's no secret that the university is generally considered a so-called left wing.
Oh, it's very far left,
right? But North Dakota itself is a very red, corn-fed, small town, rural, whatever. So. Do you think maybe being the leftist institution in the right-wing city, is that maybe part of what fuels that more moderate take on things? Like you just don't want to get the whole state yelling at you?
We don't get the whole state yelling. I think that's part of it.
Or what do you think it is that's making
it
could
also simply be just the mix of personalities I have in my department.
Yeah.
But the academy is very far left. There's no question. Anyone says it's not they themselves are so far left, they don't understand what the political spectrum is anymore. Yeah. So, it's pretty obvious that the academy is a certain way, which puts them out of touch. And then, I read Inside Higher Ed, I read The Chronicle of Higher Education, and they just a lot of times just don't get it.
Well, and
they have no idea why not everyone agrees with them. And it's like you have a couple of people maybe we should, but most of them well, we're just right.
Well, and isn't this kind of a postmodern problem? Is epistemology is hard. How do you know that you're not that person and they are right? How do you know you're not the one who's captured by the right and you're the one? How do you know? And how do you know?
I think you have to have a certain degree of self-awareness.
Yeah,
kind of where you sit on the political spectrum.
Okay,
and that's hard.
And
for
you
people.
feel like they don't have that.
I think
awareness.
A lot of people do not. Yes.
How do they not have the awareness? What is it that makes them so
if you believe you're right,
unaware?
If you believe you're correct,
and
that's one of the dilemmas.
And so would it almost be the case that you feel your cynicism is what protects you from?
I think it is. I think I've always kind of been self-aware in general, but definitely my cynicism. I may be an exceptionally cynical Gen Xer, but kind of a cynical part of a very cynical generation.
But then how do you know you're not being cynical enough about your own cynicism? Maybe you've been captured and you don't even know it.
They were kind of Inception, right?
Yeah.
We're kind of a dream within a dream within a dream. My cynicism within a cynicism
within
more cynicism.
It was in university in a philosophy class when they told me about postmodern epistemology, and that did stick with me and has never left me.
Postmodernism is interesting. So postmodernism, for those who aren't aware, is the idea that pretty much most of human existence is a social construction.
Sure.
So the problem I've always had with it, actually, I had my very first article review or book review was about a postmodern take on an ethnic conflict.
Let's go there.
And my problem was postmodernism want to tear everything down and say it's just a social construct. But then a lot of times we'll turn around and say, oh, but my idea is objectively correct.
Yeah.
My view perspective is objectively correct. It's well, you can't have it both ways.
Well, I would separate postmodernism from the postmodernists. Okay. So I would say that the postmodernists, yes, they, like you just said, they're this is a known fact that there's no such thing as truth. That's ridiculous. I kind of slice that by saying, well, it seems likely and it seems unlikely. Therefore, we're not making objective truth claims. But the specific part of most postmodernism that I'm just cannot let go of with my hands is the epistemology, the theory of knowledge. How do you know what you know?
How do you know what you know?
And how do you know that you know that? Okay, but how do you know that? And it really is turtles all the way down, because at some point
you have to have something to rest on it. Then it becomes nihilism.
And that's
at that point.
with so taking it back to kind of the original thing I would talk about, with an engineering, that it is very likely to be true that the thing you put together is right, because either the bridge holds the weight,
that's the difference,
or it doesn't. Well, and what do you do with that? How do you live with the like? Because if everybody was under a mass hallucination in the political science departments, then what? Like, what would stop it from being completely captured? How would it shake itself loose? Like, what are the checks and balances inherent in the so-called hard science degrees
is reality.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Like,
It's reality.
Either it stands up or it doesn't. You don't like. How do you?
The political scientists. I mean, there's the reason. I mean, it may just roll off the tongue very well, but it's not like politology. But we're the only ones who feel the need to call ourselves a science.
Yeah,
it's political science, and we kind of have this science envy. And some people, like, this is not my world. I'm considered what's called a squish head, which is kind of qualitative research. There's others who like do quantitative research. It's all big number crunching, and it's all these complex equations. Like, that's not really my world, but they kind of much more like, hey, we're a real science
because we're using real numbers. If we're using numbers, it must be science.
We're using numbers, and we're not just numbers, but we're using like complex equations and high degrees of math. And it's like, that's not. I don't want to. If I want to be a physicist, I'd be a physicist. I don't have the head for numbers. I like politics. I like the stories. And that's how I think about some of these complex, kind of getting back to that issue, kind of the complex international politics stuff, is that it's a story. It's a story that has many, many moving parts.
Yeah.
And diving into that story is what fascinates me. It makes me interested. The number crunching, I don't even... And even the theory building is also not interesting to me either, because I just kind of want to know more about the story.
There's definitely some kind of an impulse to be, if we're measuring something, that must make us more right? Like, exactly. And we've gone from this number to that number.
But even then you have a measuring problem. So the case mentioned about Romania, do we code that as authoritarian or not?
Yeah.
I mean, I would, because like y'all canceled an election because you didn't like the potential outcome.
Yeah.
But others would be like, well, no, you have to understand the cons, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So, how you can code things also determines the outcomes, especially when we're talking about numbers. But kind of the quantitative will then put it in this veneer of like, oh, this is real science. Mm-hmm. Whereas you're all just as subjective as someone not even doing those numbers.
All right. Well, those are some good numbers. I want to take just a brief break, and when we come back, I want to know more about how it is that you came. You said it was the Cold War had a big impact in your family's cynicism out in Jersey. I want to get more of that story of how you came to be in that position. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, don't go nowhere. All right, we are back with Dr. Thomas Ambrosio, professor of political science at NDSU. Hello, Tom.
That's me, yeah.
As you like to be called.
That's fine.
We spent the first half of the show here, or most of the show. We only got 10 minutes, 15 minutes left here, wrestling more with the day-to-day on being a professor of political science. It's a lot of research, a lot of meetings, a lot of teaching, given a lot of latitude to kind of pick and choose. And we discussed the difficulty maybe of always testing and measuring everything, but the peer review process seems to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Does that sound?
That's about right. Yeah.
Yeah. And now what I would like to know, like if I say to myself, that sounds really cool. I like all of that stuff, and I like how you get to be cynical and talk about politics all day without ever taking a stand. I like that. I like that. I try to do that too, actually, on this show. I get right up to the line as much as I can. If I wanted to become a professor, where would I even start? And it'd be nice to know how you went through it. So it started with the Berlin Wall in 1989.
I mean, in terms of like the actual process, you go to grad school.
Okay.
And then you just work on a PhD program. So that's pretty much the process for that. And then hopefully you get a job. And there are very, very few jobs for academics, depending on the field. But in particular, like the humanities is pretty much a dead area. Chances of getting a job are very, very slim. Social science is a little bit better. The hard sciences are better than that. So it's not necessarily like if you want inherent job security, today's world may not be the one you're looking for, especially as we're going through a demographic crunch.
Okay.
Universities function on 18 to 22-year-olds. So and if people haven't produced 18 to 22-year-olds 18 years ago, you have a population problem.
Yeah, and so you feel like the door is kind of closed behind you.
It's closing, especially there's a lot of universities that aren't hiring.
Yeah.
A lot of universities are going to hire adjuncts. These are people who are part-time workers who get paid a pittance. And you don't have tenure, you don't have health care.
And they never can. Or do they eventually
I know my wife of my friend, she's been stuck in adjunct hell forever. And she'll never get a full-time job.
Yeah.
And she's working way too hard for way too little. Not sure where the money is going. The students are paying tuition, but that's
into the administrators.
That's a question for another time.
Okay,
sure. I think someone else smarter than me needs to do some research on that.
Okay, sure. Well, I would like to know more about your path there.
Yeah,
anyhow, because so you grew up and your family was all of you very you say cynical, and then you said there's professor mode and there's what your wife knows from you. Was there like a strong political headwind in the house? Like, were you guys, one way or the other, making very strong, rah-rah for one team or the other?
Probably, yeah. But again, that kind of cynicalness, we kind of didn't trust anyone.
Yeah.
But, the 80s in particular, kind of when I was, coming of my own, was an interesting time. You had kind of two things happening. You had the Cold War reigniting. After the failed détente of the Nixon administration, especially Carter administration.
Yeah.
That would be, of course, you had Ford in the middle there. And then also had the Reagan Revolution, which and both of these fundamentally kind of changed the way we saw domestic politics, international politics. So Nixon was actually far more liberal than anyone actually gives him credit for, looking back at it, and was kind of all about big government and all this. Yeah. And Reagan comes in and says, no, government is not your friend. The scariest thing to ever hear is, I'm from the government and I wish to help you.
Yeah.
And then international politics, and Nixon, kind of the Nixon who had defined the party for the most part, was very much, we can make peace with the Soviet Union, détente, we can live with the Soviet Union. And Reagan's attitude was very simple. We win, they lose. And it was the Cold War gets reignited in the 80s. So it's this kind of fascinating time of domestic and international change. And it also is a time in which essentially we win, both domestically and internationally. Domestically, we have this huge economic boom. And then eventually, through a series of steps, we get, at least for a time, the Democrats even coming on board.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton was far more conservative in terms of economic issues and social issues than he would never get elected to remotely in the primary today. He's way too conservative. And then internationally, of course, Soviet Union collapses. So that kind of justifies that thread. So I kind of come of age at that time, and then I go to college and then to grad school.
Well, when you were going to college, what did you go for? Like, did you immediately go for
college is kind of weird. So colleges, I actually did this weird path where I was going to be public administration. I don't know why.
What does that mean?
Kind of working in the government. I kind of had this idea I was going to work in the government. It's kind of stupid. I don't know what I was even thinking. But I always kept. I always read constantly.
You were very cynical of government and politicians, and then you wanted to work.
I have no idea
for them.
The discretions of my youth. I was also a philosophy major as well, so that was kind of what I was more interested in, was the philosophy classes. And then I went to grad school, and I was kind of going to do political theory, which thank God I didn't, because I would not be employed, because there are no jobs for political theorists. And I wound up at that time kind of getting back into kind of Eastern Europe and the ethnic conflicts of the 90s, and that was kind of the big issue during the 1990s.
When you say into
conflicts.
it, you mean just into studying it?
Studying it. I took my classes on it. No, I did not.
Okay.
I did my classes on these ethnic conflicts. So we had, in the 90s, we had, of course, Yugoslavia collapses. You have wars in the Caucasus when the Soviet Union collapses, and other conflicts in the former Soviet Union as well. You have Rwanda genocide. You have all these different ethnic conflicts which kind of erupted at the 90s. That's kind of where my dissertation was on ethnic conflicts. And then I got hired by NDSU, and I made my dissertation into a book, and my book on ethnic conflicts comes out. I got my copy on 9/11.
Oh my!
When no one in the world cared about ethnic conflicts anymore, everyone cared about terrorism. But I wasn't really interested in terrorism so much. So I kind of then gravitated more towards looking at geopolitics, and in particular Russian views of geopolitics, and then Russian authoritarianism. So I did that for like a long time, and then I said, I'm kind of tired of that. I kind of want to do something on, maybe do some research on board games. I didn't even know there's an entire field of gaming studies.
Sure.
And it's kind of media studies essentially.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And I have my feet in other places as well.
Board games is going to obviously bump into game theory, which is going to be
right
economics more, right?
Yeah.
It's the parallels between this.
I mean, if we think about board games, they're simply models of some kind of reality.
Yeah.
They could be historical models, or they can be. We have lots of economic games, for example, where you're kind of negotiating and real estate, things of that nature. So, it's just another model. It's a model you play with.
I'm very curious what it is you think that really, like, what is the driving force? Like, if I like to peel the onion back on you and like dig up on you, like. So you went into university to work as a government administrator, not political science?
I have no idea.
So where is the kernel of this political science? Do you think it's all of that tumult during the 80s?
It was my upbringing. Yeah, It was kind of that time period. It kind of felt like going home.
Yeah,
I kind of had this weird discretion, the youthful discretion for a lot of college. Like, I don't know why I'm studying budgeting. I hate it. And all I remember now from budgeting class is that the fiscal year starts on January or July 1st.
Sure.
That's literally all I remember. And what zero budgeting is. And that's about it. That's all I remember from all those years.
What is zero budgeting?
You start with your zero budget, you build every budget new rather than saying we're going to have an increase.
I see.
Yeah, it's silly.
Not too complicated.
Yeah, but really, international politics is really my home.
Yeah, because of the complexity, you can apply your cynicism and.
But it's also how deeply rooted in history it is. I think in another world, kind of the alternative Tom Ambrosio, I would actually be an historian.
Yeah.
But I like to ask more the question why and kind of the bigger questions rather than kind of the what happened in this case. But the history is part of it for me, which I really like how you see these similar patterns throughout history.
Yeah.
Russian foreign policy, for example, which we could talk about forever, but we're not going to. But like Russian foreign policy has been pretty much the same since they the Prince of Muscovy revolted against the Golden Horde in the 1400s. It's been exactly the same. It hasn't changed. Anyone who thinks it's going to change is deluding themselves. And, maybe it will one day, but so you see these patterns over and over again. So it's like when something happens, they've been doing this forever.
Yeah. Well, and that was going to be my next question. So you've been measuring and looking at the rise of authoritarianism. Right. People talk about it having happened in the U.S. I'm curious, because you were talking about all the tumult in the 80s. When I look back on that, it seems maybe more chaotic than now, or no? Are things really?
No, the 70s were. I think the 70s are probably more chaotic. The 60s and 70s.
People talk about, and I feel like it's like.
And then some people would be like, "Well, we got through that. Yeah. We'll get through this." But all societies last until they don't.
Okay.
And all societies collapse.
Okay.
All societies eventually collapse. All countries collapse. Oog the caveman, after he beat up Ugg the caveman and said, "I'm going to be in charge forever," eventually stopped being in charge.
Yeah.
Every political institution we have, every social institution, all of it will eventually collapse. So, and all political systems eventually collapse. It's just the nature of was it the third law of thermodynamics that everything goes towards chaos?
Second.
But,
the super system as we define it collapses, but the on-the-ground cellular view of the man's day-to-day, I don't know that there was there a point where Rome actually collapsed, or did it just evolve into... You know what I mean?
Eventually the Roman Empire, especially the Western Empire collapsed, and then you had the rise of everything else, kind of our civilization. Of course, the East, continued under Byzantium, really the Eastern Romans, but people thought Rome would last forever.
Yeah.
America will eventually collapse.
Okay.
I mean, it eventually will end. Anyone who thinks it isn't, again, has not studied any history.
Well, and I've studied some, but not enough.
Yeah.
And so, and the more I study, like, and the more I see, and the more I always wonder, like, is it really of a different kind? You know, like I'm always trying to put myself
going back to political science. That ultimately, it's all been done before, and it will all be done again, and maybe in a different shape. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Yeah.
So we see these patterns over and over again. So we see the kind of rise and fall of empires. I was in Egypt at the end of last year, early into this year, and there's a great quote which I hope everyone will look up, who's about what Mark Twain says about the Sphinx, about the idea of kind of think about all the empires and that the Sphinx has seen rise and fall, all the folly of humanity, and that really that's kind of how I think of international politics and even domestic politics. That on a long enough life cycle, we're all dead.
Yeah.
On a long enough cycle, everything's going to change. The only thing we know for certain is that certainty is impossible.
Sure.
So.
Well, on that note, of not knowing anything and nothing is for certain, why don't you go ahead and plug yourself? If somebody wanted to get a hold of you, do you
sure,
try to be a political figure? Like, how?
I'm, you check me out on the political science page at NDSU, and that's probably the best way to reach me, through email. And I'm always around.
Or go play Dungeons and Dragons with Wayne.
Or play Dungeons and Dragons with Wayne, or play a board game at Paradox or Little Big Wars.
Yeah.
And you might see me there.
Okay. You wanted Maxine Nightingale. Oh, and I was going to ask, like, why this song? But I think because it's called Right Back Where We Started
And it is my favorite song. In one of my favorite movies. They only watch it wintertime when it's very, very cold out.
Okay.
Which is Slapshot.
Okay. And so that's why? Because we were just talking about all the cycles and starting back over.
It's my favorite song ever.
Okay, so it's not like on purpose for that.
Not
it's
on
very
purpose,
on theme.
But maybe I should have said it is on purpose. Actually, we do that. It was completely on purpose for my theme,
clever.
for my politics.
Yeah, you knew.
Exactly.
Okay. Of course, I'm Conrad Fargo. You can find me anywhere. You can type in Conrad in Fargo. You just go there, you type it in, you can like, share, and subscribe to me. Tom, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic show. Everybody, thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.